Welcome to the podcast. Today I speak with Ian Cook, Head of People Analytics at Visier. Ian has been with Visier almost 10 years now. Before that, he was doing benchmarking in the HR domain in Canada. Before that, he was in Scotland where he grew up. So in our talk today, he talks about his journey into the people analytics space, what his hopes and aspirations are for the discipline of people analytics in the future, and how we can get insights to people managers as well as individuals so we can make wise decisions on how not only we do work, but how we take care of our humanity, our well-being as we proceed over time. So I hope you enjoy today's discussion and learn more about Ian at Visier.com or on LinkedIn. And of course, as always, learn about what we're doing with PFAO at pfao.net. So again, hope you enjoy today's discussion with Ian Cook. Hi, welcome back. I'm here with Ian Cook, VP of People Analytics at Visier. Ian, how are you?
I am doing well, thanks, Al. Nice to be here.
Hey, it's great seeing you. I am excited for this conversation. I cannot believe we have not done this yet. I mean, you have been in the space for a number of years, and I'm not going to date you. I'll let you do that yourself. But if you would, please introduce yourself and a little bit about, what you do there at Visier.
Sure. So my simple background is I got into the people side of business through organizational development, consulting and people strategy. And when I ran into what I describe as the CFO problem, lots of great ideas on how we could do good things for people, help them be successful, help the business be successful. No capacity to persuade the CFO to actually spend money on it. And so that, again, this is back in the late 90s, sort of mid to late 90s. And that sort of pushed me into this whole, like, how do we use people data to explain to the business the difference that people make so that we do the right things? And I kind of pursued that as a career journey since the late 90s. And it's taken me through different business iterations and a bunch of consulting work, one a benchmarking business across Canada, and then the last 9 years at Visier. And I joined Visier specifically because I saw it filled a gap that was really clear to me at the time about organizations using the information they have inside themselves to understand what's going on in their business. So for Visier is this wonderful combination of extremely intelligent software developers, expert data wranglers, and then a whole bunch of domain experts who actually understand the people side of business. We kind of stitch all that together into our product. And so I represent the people side of the business. I have become quite well versed in data through the 10 plus years of working in it. So for Visier, led the growth of the product, and I focus on product and market strategy right now, which is interesting times, interesting space.
Hi, yeah, here we are, March 2022. It is very interesting times as we come out, and I'd certainly put that in quotes, come out of the pandemic. Yet there's a war in Ukraine, which has shocked the system, and we'll touch on that, later, in terms of disruptions in the world and how it impacts people's strategy, people data, and analytics, certainly. But before we get to topics like that, I want to go back in time and if I'm correct, and again, I'm sensitive, I'm a North American, I grew up here in California. So forgive me, but I do detect an accent. Is that correct?
You do, yeah. I was born and raised in Edinburgh in Scotland. So I am a proud Scot and British heritage, and moved over to Canada in 2004.
And you're probably looking at me. No, Al, you're the one with the accent. Don't be talking to me about accents. But going back, when did you move to Canada? What's your educational background? At what point did that happen?
So the educational background is quite interesting, an interesting story. So I went to university as was sort of the expectation, and I started doing a physics degree. So I studied university physics up to the first year. But during that phase, I realized I quite liked physics, but I didn't really dream in physics. I had another friend at university who he could dream in physics. It was quite phenomenal to watch, but I couldn't. So I was like, I like this, I can kind of do it, but I have to work really hard to get there. and this other character just breezed through like half the work and twice the results. It's like, so
Mhm.
so it felt like there was a gap for me. So I left. I came over to the States, worked in a bike shop, went traveling, and then went back to university and actually studied politics and philosophy. And what persuaded me to do that was a piece of advice from my studies director, who said, "Study what you think about at bus stops." And I realized through that, like when he first said that, I was like, "What? Whatever." But then I thought about it more, and I think about how organizations are put together, how people and teams work with each other to try and achieve a goal, either as political systems or as work systems or as performance systems. And I had no idea that that was actually my interest until I kind of dug into the political theory and then some of the philosophy that goes with it. So I have a master's in politics and philosophy, which led me into the organizational development space. Um, if I keep walking along the career path, I built my own event business. So entrepreneur kind of at the get go. Coming into world of work in the UK when I did, there was not a lot of opportunity. So I knew some people. I had lots of enthusiasm, probably not a lot of sense. With a friend, I built an event management business, which did okay, but was a lot of learning about doing the wrong things. Um, and then through a couple of steps that got led into the consulting world, and joined a firm to do I would the broad category would be team development, leadership development, strategy work, and some of the examples of that were working with McKinsey and Company to run a week long leadership development program for their individuals as they're starting to choose to get onto partner track, or working with Sony and Company, managing their executive level retreats around how they're going to redesign their business. Coaching skills with people like Goldman, JP Morgan Chase. So really great learning experiences. All of that led me back to going to do an MBA because I could see what was happening with the people and I understood it really well. I couldn't for the life of me articulate it into business language. And so the MBA was that step back into I need to really make a difference with what I'm trying to do. I need to be able to talk in not my language. I need to be able to talk in somebody else's language. So um, went through and did an executive MBA, probably the two hardest years of my life, working 50 hours a week and studying another 50. So uh,
Ouch. Ouch. Well, you obviously created a breadth of experiences that focused you and created the basis for what you do now. Because I see, and having known you for a number of years now, probably, if not the whole nine, then close to the whole nine at Visier, it's the case where you have a unique narrative around how the data and the analytics actually impact individual team and organizational behavior. And that connective tissue, that narrative is extremely important. I don't have to tell you that because there's some who come in from a tech or data perspective. There's others who come in from an IO psychology or psych perspective and or OD perspective, and connecting those two disciplines obviously is not easy. So my question, so are you now in the late 90s, early 2000s, when you're now doing this coaching and OD stuff and you finished your exec MBA?
just transitioning into the early 2000s. So
Okay.
my MBA it was quite an interesting experience in doing it. The MBA, the study director I had as that program taught the finance piece of the business, and verbatim he said to me one day, like, "What do you know? You're in HR." And I was like, it was quite interesting his perspective on the people side of business. It turned out not to be true, and he was quite surprised at some of the results I got in the blind marked test. He was like, "Oh, that's your mark?" It's like, "That's my mark." So he was not correct, but if that perception is reality, so through that engagement, I went on to do an ROI study as part of the sort of the end state. So actually looking at certain of the interventions that we'd done inside a couple of our banking clients and tracking it all the way from like, why did we do it? Who did we do it to? What were the outcomes for those individuals? What for the groups that we didn't touch? What were the outcomes for those? And can we get to a dollar and cents end state with this piece of people work? And it was at the time where ROI was this big thing, and I think the Jack and Patty Phillips were sort of kicking off that extension to the Kirkpatrick model. So I did the full on, like, all the way to the bottom ROI study, and realized just how hard and arbitrary it is to try and put this stuff into dollars. But the business impact and business impact that a enlightened business leader will trust is a lot easier. So, it, there's the business component, there's the social science component, and then there's the data component, all kind of
Yep.
stitched together back in
Yeah,
2001.
as you're sharing that story, I'm just thinking about how far we've come in the discipline, because you're absolutely right. When I was in the early 2000s at Gap, I had effectively sold a project that linked employee satisfaction or engagement with customer satisfaction, and in turn downstream outcomes. And that mirrored what was done at Sears in the mid to late 90s with the Sears service profit chain that was featured in HBR
Yeah,
in February of 98. So I'm geeking out a little bit, but the reason the reason I share all that is to ask this question and make this observation first, is that it was for a long time all about that downstream outcome, namely the financial outcome. And here we are in 2022 with the pandemic, where well-being is in and of itself an outcome that's desired, and bridge the gap over the past, or the 15, almost 20 years since the early 2000s, where this work was, kind of the focus. We've had other, what I would call intermediary variables, take focus. And so kind of that chain has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, that causal chain, that, there's more data within that chain. Would you agree with that? And, if so, I imagine that's one reason you now do what you do, is that there's more data to analyze these dynamics from leader decisions to these downstream outcomes. Yeah.
totally. I think, I love the question, Al. It's a fantastic question. So I think in the intervening 20 years, I would say three things have happened. First of all, that understanding of how people impact the business kind of went from, 0.11% of the working population to 1%, to 2%, to 5%, to, maybe we're at 20% now. Like, the awareness and the ability to see that if you don't consider the people in your business, your merger fails, you don't actually pivot your business. Like, all of these outcomes that people want, suddenly, when somebody works with their brain and how much they invest their brain in your business makes a difference between you winning and losing, then more and more people wake up to, oh, okay, there's something, people aren't plug and play, they take care. The second is in the digitization of work, which, a lot of it is just the transactional systems. But when I was going to do the ROI study, like, I'm walking around, I'm meeting people, I'm recording things in spreadsheets. Like, it is a entirely manual data collection effort with an entirely, human interface to make that happen. And I'm getting funny looks from people going like, "You're doing this for what?" So you're breaking down the boundaries. Again, in the intervening 20 years, you can now read sentiment from a whole bunch of different ways. You could machine read it out of commentary that employees put into cases about serving clients. It's like, this client is frustrated because da, 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 da. You machine read that case management set, you can pick up the negative sentiment, you can identify the item or items that are associated with the negative sentiment. You don't have to survey them. The technology and our capacity to process it, horsepower being one thing, but like understanding of extracting insight being a second thing, has just ramped way up. Like, we always knew it was there, but it was somebody like me reading 2,000 entries and hand coding to get the insight. Like, you just can't do that at scale. Now you plug it in, machine does a job, and then you get to work on top. So all of that's moved forward. And then the other piece is the sort of the then transition in value set, where there's this cycle between, I am a customer and an employee and a stakeholder and a voter. Like this notion of there is business and there is people is just, it's been completely blown apart.
Yeah.
So I think that coalescing of understanding the multiple hats people wear, and that the the the, the pain or the downsides or the challenges that come, whether they are financial or just even risk based, when you don't consider the person, um, are they're just so much more understood. That there is I don't think we've solved the problem, but the appetite and capacity to solve the problem is just, it's a quantum step. It's not until you ask me the question do I realize just how far we've traveled.
Oh God, it's incredible, isn't it? And this is a reality that leaders must acknowledge. Correct me if I'm wrong, in that they didn't grow up with this level of data or analytical horsepower, and it's incumbent upon them to remain educated on it and make appropriate decisions. So that's something I want to get to around ethics. I want to talk about the people cloud and all that stuff. And there's a host of questions that came out in what you just shared. But I want to actually go back, because as you were talking, it dawned on me that you have a very clear way not only of explaining your thoughts and ideas on this topic, but also what I would call systematic thinking, aka connecting the dots. And you mentioned physics before, which there's a bunch of causal interactions in physics and chemistry. So this importance of systematic thinking, if you agree, number one, where did it come from for you? Is it something that was an educational experience? Is it something that happened at the bus stop, or was it something in grade school or what have you? And if you view it as important and a muscle that can be improved upon, would you invite leaders and others to challenge themselves to think more systematically?
Yeah, so the systems piece, I think, has come through education. So I've always fascinated about, why did this team work? Why didn't this team work? Like some fairly early on experiences playing sports. I'm a mountaineer, so adventuring with people in the backcountry. The teams that don't work, it's painful. You see it. The teams that work, you kind of go like, oh my god, why is this happening? So that was just a fascination, and so I just kept probing away at that question, like why. Um, that led me to books like The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge, which is instrumental in most people I know who talk
On
about systems
myself.
thinking.
Yeah.
And I feel like, and then there's another book. It's called Images of Organization, and it actually describes, your mental model of an organization actually drives an awful lot of your assumptions, which drives your actions, which can actually cause harm. And so it's a really instructive book for going through different models. So lots of people think of an organization as an engine. Like, I've got a carburetor, I've got, well, a battery these days, but I've got something else. And you literally just plug and play. Like, oh, this one's broken, I take it out and put in another one. But when you apply that mental model to an organization and you think about the carburetor as a person, like, it's really clear. We've all had the experience. Like, taking out this person and plugging in another person is not the same. Like, it's entirely not the same. It may be better, it may be worse, it may be neutral in terms of performance, but it's not the same. And so it was like probing into, well, what is it about that reality that makes it not the same, that then just kept me pursuing this. So if it is a system and it's an ecosystem, and there's things that are influenceable and things that aren't influenceable, like, how do you intervene in a system in a way that it doesn't just spit you out, like, that it doesn't just crash, that doesn't damage the system? Again, if you start to look at ecosystem interventions, there's some really bad history out there on the planet. There's some good history and there's some really bad history. So, tread carefully. So it became a really useful model.
Well, I absolutely love it. And so I have three questions and I'm going to have to choose one. So here we go. Is this notion of an ecosystem and thinking about the images of an organization and having our biases, all is critically important. It also has been the legacy thinking, for lack of a better term, that, hey, if that individual or group isn't working out, just fire them and hire somebody else.
Yeah.
And there's an implication that if you rehire someone, then or rehire, I'm sorry, if you hire somebody else, replace somebody, that person just automatically is going to do better. And I was inspired by Herman Miller's book, The Art of Leadership, I believe, when he said, well, if someone makes a mistake and doesn't do something right, hey, why am I going to just let them go? Because I'm letting go of all this learning that just took place. So my question to you is, yeah, how much do you believe, you mentioned 20% earlier, of leaders who kind of get the human element, and how people, not just butts and seats, but human beings actually have a unique contribution, both individually and collectively, to the output of an organization. Yeah, do you think that is accelerating in terms of an understanding and appreciation, or is that kind of stuck?
So it's definitely accelerating in terms of an appreciation. Um, a clear signal this week, last week. What day is it? Anyway, I think it was last week. Um, Apple shareholders. So these are investment organizations. These are institutional investors who take their money and either to build out a pension group, or in order to pay back their shareholders, they're investing in Apple. They voted for Apple to do a civil rights audit. And so, like, we want you to look at all of your practices and how you deal with people and tell us that you're meeting your commitments. So, civil rights audit, it's not a cheap thing to do. Uh, but this was a body that would, in the past, is like, we don't care how you treat people, just so long as you keep making money. I can tell my shareholders I've made a good choice in terms of the shares that I've bought, and we are paying them back because we're invested in Apple. So Apple actually made a recommendation against doing the audit. They said, you know what, we've got it. We think our practices are fine. And it's likely that they are. Like, I think Apple's a well-run company. So this isn't about Apple being good or bad. This is
Mm-hmm.
about a group of people with a clear financial interest in the success of Apple making a choice to look at the people aspects of their practice. Like,
Wow.
I mean, it's unprecedented. I don't think it's happened before. Um,
Wow.
and so, is that your 20%? Does that mean it's like everybody? Like, no, these are the black swan events that lead to change. They aren't now everybody's doing it, but once one group has done it and once it's in the press, those are the things that start to sow a seed and start to, then actually shift practice. So that's a long way away from where we were. A long way.
It is a long way, and obviously a lot has happened to inspire, such change. And it just dawned on me, because I, having lived overseas for more than 5 years, which relative to you is a drop in the bucket. Um, I just want to ask this question, building off what you just shared. Uh, you, in all likelihood, have a unique perspective on inclusive behaviors, particularly given your travels and you having put roots in a quote unquote foreign land. And inclusion from an organizational perspective has been an extremely high priority, and rightly so. So taking off the social justice story that you just shared, where do you think we are, with inclusion, and how does your experience as a young person and as a professional over the years, how has your experience influenced your feelings and ideas on that topic?
Yeah. So and I say we a long way to go in terms of inclusion, but I also think we've come a long way. If I look at the workplace that my father worked in compared to the workplace that I work in, I personally have a lot more permission to be myself, and I work with a wonderful range of people who are fully themselves at work on a daily basis. Visier is not every workplace, but I see more and more of those. I see certain sectors, certain industries, certain geographies where that, like, come as you are, and it's not okay to question it, uh, is open. So uh, I think we've come a long way. I always like to celebrate that, but I'm certainly committed to not changing that. And then, funnily enough, coming to Canada was this really bizarre experience where I was looking to get into work. So again, if I position my experience, I am a multinational consultant who has worked with McKinsey, Sony, Goldman Sachs, all these people. I have done it globally. I've worked in Canada. I've worked in Europe. I've worked everywhere. I would sit down with these professionals. They said, "Well, that's very interesting, Ian, but what have you done in Canada?" And, I had to take a really deep breath, not to just kind of like, what's behind the question. And their mental model is like, well, you haven't done any of this in Canada, so you can't possibly be successful in Canada. And I found the mental model insulting. It's like, what is it that you aren't seeing about the rest of the world that means you can't position my experience relative to the experience that you actually need? Like, it felt like a very blinkered view. So, personally, when I got into Canada, I worked a lot with supporting access to work for people who came from outside of Canada, like explaining my journey, working voluntarily and various different boards to try and build a more inclusive work culture. Because the funny thing is, like, the data says immigrants are actually your best source of talent. They are self-motivated, they are resilient, they have an unbelievable drive to succeed. Of anybody with a predisposition to really, make stuff happen, it's somebody who's moved country.
Yeah.
So it's like, how can people not see this? It just blew my mind that people couldn't understand or see it. So yes, we've come a long way, Al, but yes, there is so much on inclusion that is not necessarily just what we see. It's what we perceive and the values we bring, and the assumptions that trap us. That I would be. We're not even close to done yet. We have a lot more work to do. So I don't know if that's a long answer, but that's how I see it.
No, it's a beautiful answer, and yeah, you're absolutely right. Of course, yeah, it's your experience. I also see commonalities, not only in my own experience, but what I'm hearing, time and time again, is that our language is not mature. It's not in line with our intentions yet. In other words, we're not sometimes asking the right questions. What have you done in Canada? It's likely not appropriate. What is your goal? What are you trying to achieve? To your point. And so,
Just a
yeah, go
quick one
ahead.
on that.
Yeah.
I would try and pivot the question. Go, can I answer a different question, which is like, how do my experiences align to helping me make me successful in Canada? I'd happily answer that question for you. So
Mm.
after the first two shocking moments, I would actually take the question and try and return it back and say, I think this is what you're asking me. And they'll go, oh yeah, of course I am. But
Of course, that's exactly what I meant. Thank you for that. Yeah, and actually, that's a build up to my question because, as we acknowledged before, and I don't mean this as a criticism. So, if our listeners are people analytics leaders or CHROs, heads of talent, or people just interested in the future of work, they're probably okay. This is interesting. However, if they reflect on their experience, even if they're a people analytics leader, even if they've been in this discipline close to 20 years, you don't have the aperture. You don't have the ability to see everything that's going on, and you might not know what questions to ask, particularly if you're CHRO. You came up as a HR generalist, so I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'd be interested in your take on this. Part of the skill of becoming a people analytics leader is knowing what questions to ask, not only of the organization in terms of the behaviors that you want and so forth, but the data, the systems, the interoperability, which I know you have a narrative on as well. So questions to ask, do you feel that to be true, that there's a lot of room to improve across disciplines?
100%. I love the way you frame it, Al, and something that we've noticed a lot, sort of what distinguishes a people analytics practitioner from just say somebody who's um, reporting out the data. I would say it's curiosity. And if you train yourself in curiosity, you train yourself in asking questions, and you train yourself in asking question chains. So I don't think it's just the question; it's the first question and the second question and the third question, that
Mm.
chain that really starts to unpack. Like, so what would it look like if? Um, and as many a
I love
consultant
that.
also knows, you can look a lot smarter asking good questions than you can be trying to answer them. So, somewhat of a survival habit, but I would rather invest in somebody who's really good at listening to an answer and digging into the question underneath than somebody who thinks they know it all. I personally caught concerned about those who think they have the answer. I feel like they just haven't pushed hard enough. You can have a current answer, but not a final answer.
Well, let's toggle a bit because I want to, if you're open to it, talk about Visier. And first off, the inspiration for you to join, 9+ years ago, and to go into where we are now. Because again, I'm going to pat you personally on the back as well as Dave Weisbach and John and Jan Schwartz and the whole team there. I probably shouldn't start naming names because then I'm just going to be here for a long time, as I'm sure you would be.
There's quite a few
Even
names
longer.
for sure.
Yeah, there's quite a few names who've contributed all the years. But what I will call out is that I perceived you all as a learning organization, as an agile organization to respond to the needs of a business and a space. And I can tell my own story on that, at some other time. But if we go back to the reason you joined Visier initially, first off, when was that? And, what inspired you to make the jump?
Yeah, so it was 9 years ago last February, to be exact. And what inspired me to make the jump? So I'd built a benchmarking business. So when the employer I was with, I'd done a entrepreneurship, so it was a net new business for that business, and we were taking data from a series of clients across Canada on a quarterly basis. We were running it through our home built benchmarking technology and providing reports back, and it was across a range of things. So here is the number of HR staff you have to employees. Here's your revenue per FTE. Here's your turnover rate. Here's your absence rate. We were learning some interesting stuff at the macro level. We actually did this interesting study about, does having more HR people help? Does having less HR people help? And the answer is, it's a bit like uh, the porridge, just the right amount. You don't need too few, you don't need too many. You end up, there's this optimal range. So that was really interesting. But every single one of my clients in that perspective was coming back to me. It's like, we like this external perspective, Ian, but my biggest trouble is doing stuff with what's inside my business. I can't see what's going on. I can't process it. I can't access it. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know what it means. So every single one of them had that problem. And then I'd been having coffee with Dave literally since he joined the business, just because there's a Vancouver network. Vancouver's a bit of a pond when it comes to business, but it's full of very great characters and entrepreneurial spirit. So it's a fun place to be. And he just started sharing, the founding story of Visier was a bunch of technologists with a really deep understanding of the BI space and how that data to insight cycle was working, and going out and asking their clients, the IT group, what do you think? And IT saying, oh, it's great. It's really good. We really like the tooling. And then going to the business and saying, well, what do you think? And the business having the opposite reactions, like, yeah, I get all this stuff. I can never find what I need. Anytime I want something changed, I have to wait. I can never ask the follow-up question. So, they conceived of the technology layer of Visier as a solution to serving the business user. And then I was the business user. I was like, this sounds like an amazing opportunity to invest all of the stuff I've been learning into making a product and then keep learning and be in this virtuous cycle. Because again, a bunch of our customers, Al, but I will be the first person to say our customers have been unimaginably helpful, supportive, and kind of key in actually driving this whole virtuous cycle that we sit inside. So it was really just the opportunity to do something entrepreneurial, because I've always had that spark, grow something distinctive that I was convinced was the way HR should be run. This isn't people analytics, and when we do HR and those things are separate. I've never seen them as separate. Like, people analytics is how you inform the business to do the right things. You don't do things and then measure if they work. That's backwards. You measure what's working, you measure what's not working, you then design interventions to improve it. So people analytics has always been the strategic engine for me in terms of how you should run the people side of business. Visier it looked like a decent vehicle, smart people, good tech, savvy investors. Seemed like it was a fertile ground for me to invest that part of my career and my knowledge in doing something product wise.
Well, yeah, I will say I sense you made a good decision. You feel you made a good decision. You have 9 laps to think to you're to evidence that you're voting with your feet and
Well,
you keep coming back.
I can share a data point on that because I think it is quite telling. Like I think I've worked for somewhere between 11 and 12 employers through my career. My longest tenure prior to Visier was 5 years, and my longest, that was one. Then my longest tenure prior to that was three. So 9 years at Visier is unprecedented. It kind of speaks for itself in
Yeah.
terms of, the alignment, the excitement, the opportunity, the growth. And we just continue to keep hitting opportunities to grow it. Um, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I'll just for those listeners, just for historical context, Vizier came on the scene. I'm probably 10 plus years into the discipline, and I don't remember how it first came to my knowledge, but I do know we were taking our peer group up to Seattle, and we're going to have an event at Starbucks. And the week before, uh, and Dave Weisbeck was going to come speak. And so the week before, Paul Pressler, no, I'm sorry, Paul Starbucks, Paul
Uh,
Paul
so,
Pressler was the CEO. Who's the CEO at Starbucks?
I don't
Not,
know. I
not,
don't remember the
not
name.
important.
Sorry.
Not important. I'm sorry I messed that one up. But anyway, he called an all hands meeting, so had to move from Starbucks. And I called a friend, and he said, "Well, you can't use our space." He was the CEO of a company there in Seattle, and he said, "Can't use our space, but you can use our lawyer space." I'm like, "That really?" Yeah. And so I called up this law firm, and I said, "Well, it's on the 26th floor." I'm almost positive it was on the 26th floor. And I arrived, and it was one of the most gorgeous office spaces that I've ever seen. It had the ceilings, were 2 floors. The monitor in 2012 was 20, 30 feet across. It was just a view of Puget Sound. Anyway, Dave came in and he has 30 customers in front of him in this gorgeous office space. So how to become, friends with somebody is you give them 30 prospects in a room in a beautiful building. By the way, that law firm was K&L Gates. And I was like, whatever, K&L Gates, K&L Gates. I go, oh, Gates.
Gates.
Gates. Gates. So yeah, it's Bill Gates' father's law firm. So anyway, Dave came in and hit it out of the park, and I was like, okay, Vizier is going to be a real deal, particularly understanding Dave's background and not only passion for the space, but he quote unquote got it. And that was a consensus of the people in the room. So, coming back to you in terms of like Vizier getting it, you getting it, asking questions, involving your customers and exploration, you now as a firm have launched the People Cloud.
Yep.
Now, tell us about that. What is that?
In its simplest form, the People Cloud is how you understand the impact of people on the business and the impact of the business on people. It's a step, and it's a step we've taken because people analytics seems to have become overloaded, overcrowded, overused, and therefore confusing and unhelpful as a language. It's common when things become of the moment, but a lot of things that are getting positioned as people analytics, we kind of go, well, yeah, it's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not everything you need. And so for us, the step into the People Cloud, it's the next evolution, and it has kind of three core components. The first is what you'd expect: business and people data together. So, what if you're running a development team? What is it that means you get your story points delivered on time? Is it the mix of people that you've got? Is it the combinations of skills that they bring? Is it the ability to work across remote, not remote? Is it the person who's managing the team? Like a whole bunch of questions around how do we get story points or calls or whatever shipped. The second piece is translating that down to the people who are making the decisions. Again, a lot of people analytics, you'll know this, a lot of people analytics started as research projects where this genius insight was developed by three individuals and it got no further. It's like, nice, not compelling. So the second piece of the People Cloud, we would call it personalization. We take the data, but we take the piece that is meaningful to the decision maker, we deliver it to them shaped already for consumption. So it's way beyond a dashboard. A dashboard is this, it's like a dashboard is like a scoreboard in a hockey game. It's just it's a big general view of what just happens. Like, well, if you're watching the game, you kind of know what's happening. Whereas this is actually parceling up, like, it's about your team, and it's about your team for this period of time, and it's about something that's material to your business. Be it an incapacity to ship because you don't have enough people, or about a risk of a key person exit, which is going to challenge you to deliver. All of that, what makes that possible is what I call context, and that's the sitting on external data about the labor market, about what's going on inside other competitive businesses, so that you know what good looks like. Often the hardest thing with people data is the the '07 recession is a good example, or prior to the '07 recession is a good example. Our current frame would be another good example. As the labor market tightens, so too resignation rate goes up. If you're just measuring resignation rate, you're like, oh no, our resignation rate is going up. It must be bad. Up and to the right is bad, right? Well, not if you're going up slower than the market. If you are 5 to 10% slower than the market, that's success. That's a result. That should be celebrated. And so if you don't have that external context, you have no idea what good is. And so for us, the people cloud is all of those three things built together, delivered so that you are using and acting on the data, not so that you're spending all your time trying to find it, shape it, work out what it means, and then get that to the person making the decision. That whole concierge-based process is too slow for the speed at which business is working. So for us, that it's an extension on top of everything we've learned about people analytics. Is this, like, how do you deliver the right answer to the right person at the right time? And that's what we encapsulate as Visier's people cloud. There's a lot of moving pieces all working in harmony.
As you shared that, I'm just thinking, well, an organization, enterprise, wouldn't do that themselves. It's not their competitive advantage. They would have to hire a bunch of people. They would have to, train them up. They'd have to empower them with adequate resources, tools, all that stuff, and pay them. So, what is your value proposition? Why effectively enlist a vendor to help do all that work?
So, three primary reasons. Speed to value. Like, you and I know, having watched the space for years, that you don't have time to sit around and think about this and work out how to build it. Like, I read a post, and I won't name the individual, but in the post, and this was probably okay at the time, but the post said, oh, well, we didn't actually do very much for the first 24 months. I was like, what? The advice was like, hang out, work out the tools you've got, work out your data sources, kind of do some stuff, because once you've learned all that, then you can start to deliver insight. Like, fair enough. If you have permission, awesome. But I'm like, yeah. I don't think I can sit here and say, hire somebody and wait 24 months before they show value. I just like, I don't live in that world. If others do, good on them. So it's the speed to value. It's like, nobody would think about building their own HRIS system. Nobody thinks about building their own engagement system. So why people continue to persist this notion that this whole value chain of data is something that we should build ourselves, I for one, I'm struggling to understand that. We see the difference between the two. The other is, there's a whole bunch of specialty knowledge which is scarce. So speed to value is one. I would say knowledge scarcity is number two. We've seen, I know I've lost track of the number of people analytics leaders that have shifted this year. I think it's going on for 100%. It's not quite, but it's it's a nip and tuck on that scale. And the reason they're shifting is because there's just not that many of them that have been there, done that, get it, can execute with stability and security. So if you're not the person who's prepared to hire the superstar, like, how'd you get going when there isn't the talent? And then the sort of two or three other pieces are sort of the innovation in the data. If you trust the notion that good is performance relative to the market, where are you getting your market data? How are you going to shape that? How do you pull that in? Like, You can't do that yourself. It doesn't exist. You certainly don't want to build the scraping system with all the liabilities that go with that to do it yourself. Whilst
Right.
it's technically possible, it may not be the most ethical approach to assembling the insight. Um, and so, as a sole organization, why would you want to enter into that? So there's things that we can do because of our scale, because of how we've designed things, because of our conceptual approach to solving this problem, which was business first, that you just can't build yourself. And that we see, okay, people will argue with this, but that's a fun debate, are absolutely essential to doing this well. Not necessarily at first base, but certainly by the time you get to second or third base. And so, that is sort of the why we go, why would you build this yourself?
Yeah, thank you for sharing that because many just don't know what's possible
Yeah.
right now. And yeah, that's incumbent upon both you and me to make the world aware of what's possible. But do you feel that, I mean, it's a two-way street insofar as it's incumbent upon us who's close to the work to evangelize the value of the work, but it's also incumbent upon a leader, whether it be a CHRO or someone in the business, even CEO, to understand if they really want to know what's happening in an organization or talent markets or trends and so forth, that there are investments that they not only can make but need to make in order to manage the system for which they are responsible. Would you, agree with that, particularly that latter part?
100%. And often we'll approach conversations with, certainly with IT, and more often with VP or C-level executives within HR. It's like, don't see this as a sales pitch. See this as educating yourself on the art of the possible, because what you think is possible and what you will hear from one group versus another group is really different. And all we need you to do, all we recommend you do, is have a good understanding of the depth of the what is actually possible based on proof. Not this. This isn't the sales talk track. This is the go and look at what our customers are doing type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's also, the flip side is that that's not just because it's a good thing to do, it's necessary. Like the SEC regulations that got changed in 2020, they're getting traction, they're getting focus, they're getting people to push to tightening them. Apple shareholders are kind of going, what if Apple, instead of having the shareholders say you need to do a civil rights audit, already had the data? They kind of
Mm-hmm.
already had the transparency, already had it done and dusted, and said, here's the math and evidence behind our policy that we have been working on. It's gone. And believe me, I think the investment in having that up front is less than trying to retroactively do it in a hurry to appease your shareholders. So it's not just you should be advised. I mean, for me, a leader's job is to understand the opportunities and risks that will push their business forward or get in their business's way. This is, in my mind, it is the biggest opportunity and risk that is untapped on the people side of business. So if you aren't digging in and understanding here, I'm not sure what you're paying attention to.
Yeah, I'm going to have to get off my rear end here and follow up on an analysis that, or a hypothesis rather, that I put forth at the beginning of the pandemic, which until this moment, I actually forgot I had done. And it was this, it was anecdotal, but it was based on the information, again, anecdotal, from the Insight 222 membership, is that we saw a very clear, and again, I'm going to say for the third time, anecdotally, that those who had more mature people analytics functions were outperforming those that were handling the pandemic and the associated crises better than those that did not. And I would venture that to be true over the past 2 years, and I certainly believe it to be true moving forward. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I probably got some uh, directional data as opposed to anecdote on that. So we've been studying, Lexi's been studying people analytics maturity for, uh, we've now got time series over two groups. I think it was 2017 and then 2021. In each of those studies, along with a professor, Janet Marlar, she's looked at the combination of people analytics practices and compared that back to return on equity, or return on assets, so some publicly available benchmarks of performance. So each time we've looked at that, those with higher levels of people analytics practice have higher levels of financial performance. We were never able to show that there's a correlation, but is it, if you have more money, you can afford a people analytics practice, or if you have a people analytics practice, do you make more money? But we recently did the time series where we looked at group at time A and then group at time B, and it's the same group and it's the same study. And so we found a 0.66 correlation that doing more people analytics pushed your results up. So
Yep.
we're starting to get the evidence that an investment in people analytics is the path by which your HR practices get better, which is the path by which your people do better, which is the path by which your business does better. And it's always difficult because it's this cycle of chains. Everybody wants to line like spend here, get that. Like, it would be wonderful if the world was that simple. There would be no problems in business to solve anymore because they were all linear and logical. That's not how business works. So there's this chain. But we're starting to build the body of evidence that suggests investments in people analytics are what bring about superior practice in your business, which then brings about the opportunity for superior performance. The performance thing is always driven by market forces. You could be an excellent organization in a really bad market. That's that. But if you're still going to do better than a rubbish organization in a bad market. So, why wouldn't you try and be excellent? Is kind of a piece of that. So we're starting to see those answers, and we'll keep pushing.
And we'll keep pushing is right, because one thing that, going back to 2014, we showed that those with quote unquote mature is subjective, but there are some criteria that we identified as mature across what I would call the analytics maturity progression, is that those who are analytics competitors in this model, the leaders in which they served, the decision making was actually with elevated confidence. So that was the construct we were trying to measure:
Nice.
confidence, yep. leader decision making.
Yep.
And so, I imagine that's even more true these days because there's better insight, again, not only about what's happening in an organization, but to your earlier point with the people cloud, relative to other organizations and, what's happening in the external market.
And that's what's driven us down the people cloud development path. The work that Lexi did back in 2017 highlighted that the more different populations that access the data, the more value. So we have measurement criteria around maturity. One of the criteria is the pure volume of people, and then categorized by, are they business unit leaders, are they frontline leaders, are they HR business partners. So the broader the spread of consumption of insight, the more different data sources are put in, the higher the maturity, the higher the impact. So aligning with what you're saying, Al, it is that decision confidence, and it's why we've invested a lot in that personalization track, because we know a single dashboard to 100 managers is really different than a personalized dashboard to 100 managers. That's a one-to-many versus a one-to-one. And again, like, for us to get the kind of impact out of people data that we know it can bring, we need to be able to do that one-to-one at scale. And that's where we are with the people cloud. That's literally what we can do. And that's driven out of the research. That's this whole virtuous cycle of, like, we built it, we run it, we studied it, we improved it, we built it, we run it, we studied it, we improved it.
And if I say, correct me if I'm wrong again, I'm going to kick myself. But this is what I hear you saying. And we realize this in the reality of remote work, and that everything is just a click away. And you removing yourself from a dashboard or something similar, report, is also a click away. So if there's a dashboard, for example, that I have to click down to get the information, my propensity to do that diminishes with each and every click. And what I'm hearing is you're minimizing the clicks to value, the time to value. Is that right?
There's the clicks to value, and then there's the actual decision cycle. So lots of people are going to go, well, I don't need to do this because my managers can get the data they need already. But what they mean is there is a spreadsheet with a bunch of rows and columns that is available to whoever chooses to look at it. What that succumbs to is, very simply subjective bias, because every manager picks up that data, looks at it, makes their own judgment, runs their own math, brings their own perspective on what their business is about, and decides on a direction to go. And so it's this is where I sort of link back to HR strategy and the need for something like Visier's People Cloud. Is if you're actually trying to make HR strategy happen, the worst thing to do is give people unstructured information and have them interpret and make up their own mind and go and act on it. Because then you've got literally, as many different interpretations and possible downstream decisions as you do have people accessing the data. And this is something that I think people, it's really easy to say, oh, job done, they've got the spreadsheet, check. But how much is being undone because the interpretation on the spreadsheet, the what it means and why it means that is left to chance is somewhat stunning in my mind. Like finance wouldn't let that happen.
Yeah. And to emphasize the point, and I'd be interested in your perspective on this, is that if I look at the history of data visualization and Edward Tufte's work for a generation, but certainly at the advancement of the internet, he was like the person who really created the user experience, or was looked upon for guidance on where the energy goes on a screen and click through. And then we have a bunch of thought leaders and others putting together books and what have you, some fantastic, there's no criticism here, but really how to create charts and graphs and so forth, so it can be consumed and understood. But even then, do we want managers and others creating charts and graphs? Can we just embed that knowledge in a tool so they can actually focus on making good decisions? Is that part of your value proposition?
It's totally part of the value proposition, and there's a stage after that as well, Al. So if I think about a lot of what Tufte highlighted, it's like, how do you properly represent data in a way that's informative? There's a whole next step after that was like, how do you shape that data so that it guides decision? Mm-hmm. And so it's not only through the visualization to make a clean, informative decision, it's actually to simplify and guide within the visualization so you see good, bad, right, wrong. So I'll use an example. One of our visualizations is a simple quadrant, metric on the bottom axis, metric on the top axis. And then you can color code which quadrants. So if high, so high on one axis and high on the other axis, that means I've got a lot of events happening for a really expensive population. That's a bad quadrant. We make it red. Like, so I don't have to go through that whole mental load of like, high, oh, that's bad. Oh, that's there. Right. I got it. So like, there's the pure visualization world, but then there's like, well, what does it mean to the consumer? And if you can layer in what it means to the consumer into the visual and have that displayed, knowing the consumer's decision pattern, that's where you get adoption. That's where you get decision. That's where you get speed to action. And that's what, again, we've been visualizing for decades. We're into the process of actually structuring the decision space. So we're not making the decision. We're not into the, oh, we'll tell you what to do. I'm not a great fan of that in the people space. There's too many options. But if you narrow the decision space and focus the options, then you start to orchestrate action. And that's where we're at. That's the kind of the exciting piece of where our technology has got to.
Well, thank you I think your explanation there was beautiful. And I just want to call out a distinction there that it just went quickly. Is go back 5-10 years ago, prescriptive analytics was, we got to get from predictive to prescriptive. And I was one of the few just cringing, going, no, if that, because now we cannot have data or machines or these algorithms making decisions. In some cases, it's appropriate, particularly if it's a closed system that's very tight and it's not affecting human beings, which in and of themselves are dynamic and need to be appreciated for their uniqueness. So what I heard you say, just to call out, it's not prescriptive, but it's creating the basis by which to make informed decisions at speed, at scale, with this level of personalization that you were speaking.
Totally.
Is that accurate?
That is really accurate. And again, I'm going to give props to Kemi and Shahar at Snap for sort of the way that they phrased it is like data informed. Lots of people have been talking about data and driven, and their pivot was really to this data informed. And so the data guides, shapes, educates on the decision, but it doesn't make the decision, because we should know that that doesn't work. Like there's a long time ago story from Google where they produced this score and they were going to rank people on promotion based on the score. The math was all right, but the managers refused to use it because the decision about who gets promoted is too important, the accountability on that is too high to delegate to a piece of technology. So, there's places where prescription works, known problem, known outcome, bingo, automate, no problem. But there's so much nuance in other decisions around people that, it's more about ranking who should we focus on. And then if we focus on them, what are the options available to us? So you're guiding the person to something better as opposed to taking control away. And I think that's a really important distinction.
Absolutely love it. And unsurprisingly, Ian, I feel that we could talk for the rest of the afternoon. We do probably have 5-10 more minutes, and there's a couple more questions I want to ask you. Number one is what you like to do in your spare time. But we'll get to that after this question, if you don't mind me helping prioritize. It's as we in people analytics and really the future of work, because it's about how work gets done and employee experience, inclusion, these themes that we talked about. But what are your hopes for, where we're heading over the next, few years? What would you like to see happen? And what, maybe embedded in that, what are some of your concerns as well? What do you hope doesn't happen?
So my overall drive and the optimism that sustains my energy on a daily basis is this drive towards a more balanced view of work. I'm not in the camp of like employees should have more power and business should have less, or business should have more and employees should have less. I try not to look at the interaction of work as a them versus us or us versus them. We've been moving and continue to move towards what I call co-creation, where there's an interplay and recognition on each side. There's stuff I need done, there's stuff I can do. How do we get better at managing that ongoing relationship with adult choices on each side? So I see progress there. I can see it slipping back. I can see progress, but again, where we are compared to where we were when my father was working, massive leaps forward. I think that some of that is going to stick around, and that I appreciate, because I've always been struck, and I still am struck by how much people have to give if you can only let them. And most of the time organizations and control systems get in the way. And if we can recognize that, enabling people to give how they wish to give is totally win-win, and it can build an excellent business. So lots in there, and I'm certainly not suggesting we're anywhere close to that nirvana, but we have a lot more of it than we ever did. Celebrate progress. The thing that I think my current concern, and I think it's likely happening, is the kind of crash back to the office, unraveling some of the need to work intentionally and be more conscious about how we work intentionally, just sort of falling away, because we all just fall back into the going to the office is easy. Well, if I don't go to the office, I'm not going to get promoted. If I don't go to the office, my what's going to happen, what's going to not happen, my boss won't like me, and that eroding some of the choice that has been available for certain working populations that maybe found it easier to do hybrid versus the office. So always a bit of a yin and yang character. I would rather travel with optimism and be fully prepared for the downside. Most people who work with me, they go, "But you're so optimistic." Ian, that yes, and I spend a lot of time worrying about the things that will go wrong.
Well, that's your job, and that's just prudent. Going back to systematic thinking. I mean, that's just you can just look at the good side, but if you don't look at the whole system, there's some risk there, and you see the risk. And I couldn't agree more. So, yeah, I share your optimism. I also share, your concerns, and particularly given that we are now in this age where we're creating very clear and ever clearer digital footprints on how we're spending our time, and including where we're spending our time. What is optimal for the organization relative to the individual, and how can that be, to your point, a conscious exchange as opposed to a battle? So
Just a super quick personal story. So I am intolerant to wheat. I didn't know it at the time, but I used to work for myself, and I would always not work in the afternoon. I would work intensely in the morning and work in the evening. I would just avoid the afternoon. When I went into a 9 to 5 job, I would have a sandwich for lunch. I would be semi asleep for the 2 hours after lunch as an effect of wheat. And it used to drive me crazy that this business trapped my time so that they paid me for 2 hours of the worst time in the day. It's like, why are you paying me for such bad time? I can't help myself. Again, I didn't know it was a medical condition at the time, but like, you are paying me for the worst time in the day. If you let me go and ride my bike, I would be so much more productive for you.
wow.
And
And that's go ahead.
because I had the option to work for myself, and then I worked in time bound salary. It was like that experience was really tangible, because like, you're just paying me for my worst time. This seems daft.
It's on the other side of the coin. Here we are. If that reality is present, not only in stories that you just shared, but also in the data, why perpetuate these legacy norms that aren't serving the organization or the individual?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I
Questionable.
think that's the right balance, Al. It's not just not serving the individual, it's not serving the business either.
Right, right. Well, last thing, you mentioned bike riding. I know you do some cross country skiing as well up there in Whistler, Vancouver area. How do you spend your free time, your fun time?
So my fun. So I have a family. I have two sons just in their early teens, and so spending time with them is always a something I relish, something I enjoy. And then I stay fit and I stay sort of balanced by riding a bike from sort of spring through to fall, and then cross country skiing or backcountry skiing through the winter. The reason to live in
Okay.
Vancouver and enjoy the rain is because it's cold enough for it to be snow on the hills. And if I was to do anything on a day, it would be to go skiing. I am as passionate about snow and skiing as I am people analytics.
Wow, that's good to know. Well, I'm going to have to visit you up there. How long have you been there in Vancouver?
It's going to be 18 years this year, so
Wow, that's a good
it's a
run.
good run. Yeah, it's a good
Yeah.
run. It's a good city to live in.
Well,
It's
it's beautiful. And I cannot wait to get back up there and see you and the team. And so, thank you for sharing. Thank you for doing what you do and how you do it, and what you contributed to the space and what you've built there at Visier. I mean, it's really amazing. So, thank you.
it's a pleasure, Al. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening today. If you want to learn more about today's guest, go to pafal.net. You'll be able to see links to the bio as well as to the video of today's program. You'll also have the chance to support this podcast and other shows that we do by becoming a PAFAL community member. You can also donate if you choose. What will be helpful to support PAFAL, the People Data for Good movement, and me will be to share this episode with friends and coworkers and others who might find it valuable. Finally, for updates on upcoming episodes, shows, and events, please subscribe to our newsletter at pafal.net. At the bottom, you can also see our social media presence. So please subscribe to our company page on LinkedIn, follow us on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. We're active as can be, and we want to provide this content to you that is timely, relevant, and actionable. So again, thank you for listening today, and hope to see you soon. I also want to give a shout out to Jenna Dern, Malaz El Sheikh, and Sarah Sparnan, who without them, this show would not happen. And now go out and make some great things happen.